In Germany, the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution has just declared that the AfD is a verified right-wing extremist endeavour. Depending on your point of view, this is either an important step in the protection of the democratic order or an act of tyranny by the elite. I don't want to get into an argument about whether or not this was the right thing to do, but I do think that it's a good idea to look at exactly what has happened and what it means for the AfD. In 1933, the National Socialist German Workers' Party transformed Germany into a single-party totalitarian state, and it took them only 8 months. That left the architects of modern Germany in a difficult position. On the one hand, they wanted to include a mechanism to ban parties that want to do exactly what the Nazis did, but on the other hand, banning parties is exactly the kind of undemocratic thing that the Nazis did. So the solution was to have a mechanism in place, but set the bar extremely high. And by the way, that's not what's just happened. It's simply been verified that the AfD is right-wing extremist, but more is required to actually ban it. The AfD began as a Eurosceptic party who basically felt that the euro as a currency was a failure. The main argument was that the euro exposed poorer countries to the risk of economic crisis, leaving wealthier countries on the hook to bail them out. But almost as soon as it was founded, the AfD started moving noticeably to the right. In particular, it became involved in the anti-immigration movement to the point that its radical wing began to look positively xenophobic. In 2021, the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution declared that it suspected the AfD of being right-wing extremist, a status which allowed it to put the party under observation and gather more evidence. The party went to the courts to try to stop this happening, but basically failed. And now, after a couple more years, the Office for the Protection of the Constitution has announced its finding that the AfD is definitely right-wing extremist. The report, detailing all the evidence that it considered and its rationale, is 11,000 pages long. What it boils down to is this. The party is, or so we're told, seeking to exclude entire ethnic groups from full participation in society, thus effectively relegating them to the status of second-class citizens. This is seen as a violation of Article 1 of the Basic Law, which states that the government's top priority is to protect human dignity. Now, it's not as if this is all in the official party manifesto. The AfD isn't going to publicly admit that it intends to violate the Constitution. That means, though, that we basically have to take the federal office's word for it that they really did uncover all of this evidence. Unsurprisingly, the AfD considers this whole thing to be a politically motivated persecution by what they call the cartel parties, that is, all the other parties in the Bundestag who are desperate to cling to power. In other words, it's a conspiracy. The party has now sent the office a cease and desist letter demanding the removal of this status and threatening legal action if it is not removed. We can assume that the AfD is going to fight this all the way to the top, and we can also assume that it's going to fail. The other parties, of course, have all welcomed the report, and as far as I can tell, some of the harshest criticisms of the AfD have come from the CDU and the CSU. But there's a very good reason for that. These are the parties that have most reason to fear that they could lose votes to the AfD, since there's actually quite a bit of overlap between those parties' radical wings and the AfD's moderate wing. They don't want to be tarred with the same brush. One prominent CDU politician, Jens Spahn, didn't help matters by suggesting that it would be a good idea to treat the AfD just like any other opposition party, leading to suggestions that he was trying to normalize the AfD. And by the way, large numbers of CDU members think that Jens Spahn is a bit of an idiot. In any case, the publication of this report now gives the CDU the perfect opportunity to demonstrate to the world just how opposed to the AfD it really is. But what does this mean for the AfD? Well, in the short term, it makes it easier for the other parties to justify minimizing the AfD's influence in the Bundestag. Instead of just weakly saying, we don't like your policies, they can now say, we have documented proof that you can't be trusted. For example, politicians from all political parties represented in the Bundestag, including those in opposition, can chair parliamentary committees. Now, these are supposed to be apolitical, but they do have an important role to play in the drafting of legislation. A chair acting in bad faith can affect how this process works. Now that the AfD has been given this status, voices calling for it to be banned have grown much louder. But given the way that it could potentially affect one of the most fundamental democratic rights of them all, it won't surprise you to learn that banning a party is not very easy. In the entire history of the Federal Republic of Germany, only 2 parties have ever been successfully banned, and one of them was effectively the original Nazi Party under a new name. A request to ban a party can come from the federal government, the Bundestag, or the Bundesrat. What needs to happen is for the Federal Constitutional Court to be presented with overwhelming evidence that the party can and should be banned. 11,000 pages of documented evidence that the party is in fact right-wing extremist is a good start, but it has to go deeper than that. The court needs to be convinced that the party aims to undermine the democratic order or the integrity of the Federal Republic, and that it might actually succeed. In the past, courts have ruled that it's not enough that a party simply says undemocratic or unconstitutional things. It has to actively and aggressively pursue policies that endanger human dignity, the democratic principle, the rule of law, or the territorial integrity of the country. If this is successful, then the party can be forced to disband and its assets seized, and also the creation of a replacement party is illegal. However, any party that is banned can appeal to the European Court of Human Rights, and it's expected that that court will be even more reluctant than the German Federal Constitutional Court to approve such a ban. And yes, the idea of a party that considers national sovereignty to be absolutely paramount appealing to an international court is quite ironic. But this is one reason that the German government is going to want to make absolutely certain that it has a completely watertight case if it's going to consider a ban. One thing is for sure though, a lot of politicians and activists are going to be getting very angry with each other in the next couple of years. Germany with a very difficult... The Federal Office for the Protection of the status calls... what needs to happen is for the